We are going to have a very insightful lecture this morning. I'll urge you to take notes. Don't just listen, it's a very important lecture. So kindly take notes, interact, ask questions, and your friends who are not here yet, send them messages to join us. Without much ado, I respectfully invite Prof. and Yulia for the lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction, and good morning, everyone. You are all awake? Very good. It's a pleasure for us to be here in Ghana. It's not my first time, but it's Julia's first time. So please welcome her especially. Because I have been to Ghana quite a few times, I started to bring my students back in the 90s. So I've been here quite many times, and I enjoy it so much. So I'm very happy that I also could bring someone else from Volda University College this time. So what we will talk about today, Julia will explain to us.
Hello, good morning everyone. It is a privilege, and I'm very happy to be here at the UPSA and in Ghana and in Africa for the first time ever. So today we're going to talk for now less than the 2 hours, so you won't be sitting for too long anymore, about intercultural competency, intercultural communication, and culture shock. Have you heard any of these notions before? Yes, great. So then you will going to be an interactive public and know what we're talking about. So today, as I said, we're going to go briefly through what intercultural competence is, what culture is, how do we communicate in between cultures, what is culture shock, and we're going to add some of our personal experiences to illustrate a little bit better what we're talking about.
So, when you come to another culture, you need to know something about it. Otherwise, you can do a few mistakes. So if you look at these drawings, this is actually a commercial. It's a commercial for a pill. As you can see, this guy, he has a headache. He's not feeling well. So the commercial says, if you take this pill, you will feel so well, you will feel okay, and you will be okay and well. But, there is a but. This company who launched this commercial, they launched it in the Middle East. And can you imagine that that could have been a mistake? It was launched in the Middle East. And how do the Middle Eastern people read? They read from left to right. They read this way. So then for them, the commercial said, if you're feeling well, take this pill and you will feel miserable. So, you know, it's very good that you know at least a little bit about cultures. So, that is what we are going to talk a little bit about today. So, intercultural competence, is it something special? I would say yes and no. Because it takes some knowledge, you need to have some knowledge, as I said, about other cultures. But it's also a generic competence to know about the other person you are talking to, because you can talk to your grandfather. Maybe you have some problems understanding your grandfather and grandmother across the generations, or the other way around. But if you, as a Ghanaian youth, talk to a Norwegian youth, you might not have so many problems because you have the same, or at least a lot of common things in the youth culture. So, it's about communication across some kind of hindrances. It could be age, it could be generations, and it can be culture. So it's almost about the same thing. You have to understand the other and try to learn even though there are some differences. And it can also be that the person from the rural area have problems with talking to a person from the urban area. So these are things that can cause some difficulties.
And before we move on, this is the part where we had some technical issues. I can check on my phone where I still have internet that things might work. So if you quickly take, everybody has internet? Yes? No? Yes? The ones who have. If you could take the phone, go to that website. It's mentimeter.com. And type in the code you see under. And I'm only asking you to do this because we were promised that in the course of the day we'll have some results with the internet, and then maybe we can get back to it. And if not, we will be sending it to our colleagues here so they can share it with you. Are you in? I can see when you type in what culture is in one word. And at the end, we will share it with you, okay? I can say some of the things that show up on my screen and you will just have to take my word for it, but as I said, I'll try to share this at the end. Some of you said that culture is food, traditions, language, behavior, and that's what came in so far. Should we try to move on?
Very good, yeah. And it's very interesting answers, and I think you are all right. But culture is very difficult to really get a grip on because it's almost everything. It's, as you said, it's food, it's behavior, it's language, and we will come to these things when we move on. But what you see at a person is clothing, appearance, the way they behave and stuff, but it's not necessarily telling really who that person is, because the greatest part of culture you cannot see. Actually, our culture is inside our heads. So it's very difficult when you see a person to see if it's a Ghanaian or it's a Norwegian or it's a Russian, because the appearance can lie, right? It doesn't necessarily say the truth about the person. So, culture can be like a tree. It has roots and it has branches, different kind of varieties. Or it can be an onion. You peel one layer after another, but there is no real kernel inside. Or it can be an iceberg. An iceberg is very often used as a good example of culture, because you can only see a small part of the iceberg because the larger part is under the sea. So that is a good picture of culture. Most part of the culture we have, you cannot see, right?
Have you heard of Edward T. Hall? Some of you yes, some of you no. Øyvind here talked about the iceberg. So Edward T. Hall in 1976, he was an American anthropologist. He came up with the concept that culture is like an iceberg, right? So, as Øyvind said, a very small portion is visible at the surface, and generally I think the scientists say that only about 10% of an iceberg is visible and 90% is under the water, the real iceberg, the real ice. Well, Edward T. Hall said the same about culture, right? So at any given time, about 10% of the things you see in somebody, it's at the surface, and it's surface culture. In general, it is explicit. It's the language, it's the appearance, it's the traditions, it's whatever the colors of the flag, the national language, and so on. The food, not least. But what you don't see is, for example, Behavior towards the elderly. In some cultures, elderlies are taken care of at home by the rest of the families. In other cultures, like in Norway, for example, they want to be independent as long as possible, so they stay at home until they are 100, and when they can't take care of themselves, they move into elderly care, into elderly homes, right? Politeness. What is it polite? In one culture is not necessarily polite in another culture, right? I would have expected, and you will see why later on, that if I go through a door and there is a man in front of me, that person would open the door. At the same time, I would be expected that if there is an elderly person in front of me, I would open the door for them. In other culture, if a man opens the door for a woman, it's like, hey, what are you doing? Do you think I can manage myself? Yeah? It doesn't mean that it's unpolite in that culture, but it might mean that it's unpolite in your own culture. So there are lots and lots and lots of things that are part of the deep culture that we not necessarily think of. It's not tangible. It's not the first thing you talk or you think about when you see a person, but getting to know that person, getting to know that community, society, you see there are other values that actually form the bulk, the most part of it. Another example, if you would like, it's work authority. In some cultures, how you interact with your colleagues at work, it's very hierarchical, right? Have you noticed something here when I talked about my colleague? Have you noticed how I called him? I called him by his first name, right? I said Øyvind. It doesn't mean I respect him less by calling him Øyvind and not Professor Økland. It doesn't mean I don't know what his title is, but it means that in this context, we are colleagues. The respect is there. But in our culture, there is a flat structure when it comes to workplace. I would literally go and check with the director if he can give me a signature, or pass by and say, hey, I saw you in the newspaper, without this meaning that I'm disrespectful. But that is something that's applied in Norway and not necessarily in other culture. Would somebody care to tell me an example about deep culture in Ghana? I won't eat anybody. That's also part of the culture. Yes, please?
Not using your left hand to basically interact with people. It's seen as very disrespectful. So yeah,
It's a very good example, because did you see when I said, did you notice anything? I touched him with the left hand. It doesn't mean that, again, I meant to be disrespectful. So that's a very, very good example.
Yeah.
But we don't have time to go so into deep here. Øyvind is going to take over.
Yeah, let's just mention a little, just a few words about Edward T. Hall, because he is called the father of intercultural communication. So that's why we mention him. It's not because he himself intended to create a new academic subject or field, but he started to train Americans just after the Second World War, Americans who were going abroad. And then he was teaching them, he had practical courses, he was a social anthropologist, and he had practical courses for them. And if you take the next one, he published a book in 1959. It was a bestseller. It was called The Silent Language. And it was about body language, gestures, how what about the distance between people when we talk, and things like this that people were very occupied with, and we still are. So this was a bestseller. So that's why he is called father of intercultural communication, because what he laid the foundation of, we still use a lot in teaching and so on. So, we talked about already some of the differences between Norway and Ghana. So let us just dwell a little bit about Norwegians. What is a Norwegian? These people that I have pictures of, they are actually all Norwegians. That is relate that to what we talked about, the iceberg. Because maybe they don't look like you think a Norwegian would look like, but they are all Norwegians. So you cannot look at the appearance and say that this is a Norwegian and this is not a Norwegian. So the lady there was one of the best sprinters in Norway, and there is a wrestler. She is also Norwegian, and you have lap people up on the right, and this is a footballer from Norway. He still plays in the Premier League in England.
Can I just ask quickly,
Yes.
what do you think a Norwegian looks like? What did you think a Norwegian looked like? Did you have any stereotypes in your heads?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, no, I mean big Viking helmets, yes, no?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So, what does a Ghanaian look like? You recognize? Yeah, familiar person. We are not going into politics, but this is, this is a Ghanaian. And this is also a Ghanaian. It's actually a footballer in Norway. He played in Norway. This is also a Ghanaian. He became a native, I think he became a chief in some kind of, in one of the tribes. You have to, this one, yeah. And these are also Ghanaians, friends and people I know. So, what are the values? If you look at this guy, he is a Norwegian, and he is, he just died, he was 100 years, and he was one of the richest persons in Norway. But he didn't look like it at all. He went with this hat most of the time, and he had a very cheap cabin up in the mountains with no electricity, no water supply. He had to go and fetch the water. So he actually constituted some of the Norwegian values that if you are rich, you don't necessarily have to show it to everyone. Everyone knew that he was rich, but he didn't have to show it. So I just Googled actually some of the values that we could say that are Norwegians. Like gender equality is very important. As a husband, I have to do housework or house chores in my house. I also have to cook. Otherwise, I'm not a real good husband. So, we have to share and we have to be equal. So gender equality also at work is very important. That if you do the same kind of work, you also have the same salary. If you are equal on the equal level, same level, you have to have the same salary. So that's very important. Honesty is another important value. Simplicity, independence, equality, as I mentioned. So then, what is the Ghanaian values? I'm sure if I asked you, I could get many good answers. But what I did, to save some time, I Googled it. And I saw what Google answered me. So take it for what it is. It's no truth necessarily. You might disagree, but it resonated well with my experiences also. Family values, very important, very important. And you are very warm and friendly. We have experienced that so many times, that we are so welcomed, so heartily taken care of. You have a very relaxed attitude to life. I remember one of the first time I was in Ghana, there was buses with all kind of paintings, with different slogans. And one of the slogans I remember was, "No hurry in life." No hurry in life. And I think that was a very good slogan. No hurry in life. And politeness is important. You are open, you are trusting, you have a high view of religion. And then if we go to stereotypes, it's very important to, stereotypes is the kind of things that you think about the other person before you actually meet the person, and you can maybe learn that it's not true. But some of the stereotypes can help us to understand the other person a little bit, and they are not necessarily untrue or false. There can be some truth in some of these stereotypes. But stereotypes about Norway, I could have asked you again, but to save time, yeah, you know, it can be cold, it can be snow. At this time of the year, actually, it can snow a lot and be cold. It's getting warmer at this time, but it can be cold. And Norwegians, we don't feel cold. We are used to it. We just put on clothes. It's no big deal. If it's cold, we just put on clothes. No problem. And Norwegians, they can ski everywhere, even to the shops. Well, that's not quite true, but, well, some places maybe. And polar bears roam free. Well, not true, but we have an island that is Norwegian up in the ocean north of Norway, Svalbard, and there you actually have to have a gun. If you go outside the center of the city, you have to have a gun, otherwise you can meet a polar bear, and it's very dangerous.
Can I interject and add one more Norwegian stereotypical thing? You've heard about Father Christmas, Santa Claus. Very often, when you're thinking about it, people in Scandinavia would connect it with another country, which is Finland. But everybody outside, they think north, snow, Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And that was what I thought as well. You see why.
Good. Yeah. So, also, all Norwegians are tall. Well, I'm tall. I'm just average. I'm not blonde, but many are blonde. And blue-eyed. I'm blue-eyed. So there's some truth in it. The land of eternal darkness. Well, it's not eternal darkness, but in the winter it can be dark. In the northern Norway, it can be dark almost all day and at least all night. But it's the opposite in the summer. In the summer, you have, in the northern Norway, you have sunlight, 24 hours. If you go north, really north, you have 24 hours of sunlight. It's called the midnight sun. And Norwegians are nouveau-riche. Well, some are nouveau-riche because of the oil, maybe. Some can earn a lot of money. And Norway is about nature. Volda, you all should experience Volda at least once in life. It's such beautiful nature. It's mountains, it's high mountains, and it's deep fjords, and so many things to see. So people go hiking a lot. Scandinavia is all about the same thing. Well, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark is called Scandinavia, and we have similarities, and we can understand each other's languages. But it's of course some differences also. And Norwegians are barbaric Vikings. Well, we are both proud and not so proud about our history, because the Vikings between 1800 and 1000, they were quite barbaric, some of them, but they also were very innovative. They had these ships, and they went down to the Mediterranean, they went on the rivers in Russia, in Ukraine, and they traveled a lot. And of course they did some bad things, but they were also traders. They traded long distances. Then let's move to Ghanaian stereotypes. Again, I cannot say it's truth, but it's again, I have to blame Google. So it's not me saying this, but it's Google. So, And it's not Elon Musk, but it's Google. So, Ghanaians resemble Nigerians, and they are hunters and gatherers. Not so many, maybe, I think, anymore. And they have basically chiefdoms. Some chiefdoms you have, but it's not basic things, I would think. All Ghanaians believe in black magic. No? Yeah? Yeah, false. Okay. And, let's see, Ashantis are braggers and want to splash money all over. Yes. Yeah. And Ga people are big talkers and stingy. And answer a question with a question. And Kwao men are business-minded. Yes. Okay, this is very true then. Ghanaians are polygamous. No. And Fanti men are romantic. Yeah. Oh, okay. Very good.
So, now we've heard a little bit about our perspectives, Googled, of what stereotypes are, but what happens when you mix these stereotypes? I knew where Ghana is on the map. I didn't know all the stereotypes. I definitely didn't know about who's romantic and who's business-minded. So thank you, Eivind. But generally, what happens if you take somebody from a certain culture and suddenly take them out of their context, their comfort zone, and put them somewhere else? Any guess? It says on the screen. It says, yeah. You experience culture shock, because everything we are taught, everything we experience since birth, everything we learn from school, through family relations, is so well integrated in ourselves that it defines us, right? It defines the culture by proximity, the community, and so on. So when you take me and tell me I'm going to fly to Ghana, I'm very excited, but then I'm thinking, are there snakes? You know, I get to the hotel, I live on the 3rd floor, and I'm looking under the bed. Are there snakes under my bed? It doesn't mean that I want to belittle the culture, the Ghanaian culture, but this is what, in my mind, from my perspective, from where I'm standing, might be the truth. The same way, like for you, that might be worried that you meet polar bears or Vikings on the streets of Norway, right? So the culture shock was a concept, a model, devised by a Canadian anthropologist, Kalervo Oberg, already in the 50s or 60s. And this part I actually have to read, where he said, define culture shock as a series of emotional reactions precipitated by anxiety which results when you're taken out of your context. Yeah? And when you lose everything that's familiar, everything that you're used to, all the symbols that you know, and then you're suddenly forced to make adjustments. Yeah? So that's what culture shock is. You're taking, in basic explanation, you're taken from what you know, from your comfort zone, and you're dropped in something completely new. And that's something that most of the students experience when they go abroad, right? Most of the lecturers, afraid of snakes, experience when they go abroad as well. But Kalervo Oberg, he devised this model, which is real today as well, it's still applicable, where he said, every time you experience culture shock, you go through 4 stages. Yeah? The first stage is the honeymoon. I landed in Ghana. I was happy. There were no snakes under my bed. I'm really, really happy. If I would stay longer here, I would go through the culture shock. Things that I see around me start to irritate me. Things that I experience are not like home. You know, at the beginning, everything is new, everything is exciting. You learn things, you see things, you experience things, you're happy. You ate spicy food and nothing bad happened. But then after a month, you ate spicy food and it's like, oh, come on, do you have non-spicy food around? And lots of similar things, right? And that's when you go into this phase of a culture shock. But guess what? Experiencing culture shock doesn't mean you have a disease or something. It's curable. It's not even, not incurable. It's something that passes, because once you internalized and you accepted the things around you, you're on the path to recovery. Okay, I'm missing non-spicy food, but you know what? Ghanaian food is still good, and I enjoy it, right? I haven't seen any snakes still, but you know, maybe it would be good to go in the north regions and actually explore a little bit of nature, right? So when you start adapting, you're in this third phase that's called recovery. And then from there, everything goes well. Then you adjust it. Then you feel like a Ghanaian. I'm still to feel like a Ghanaian. It means that I have to come back. But you know what happens? This is in the context, I'm teaching this culture shock seminar to international students, and the purpose of it is to show them that whatever they feel, it's not unique to them. It doesn't mean that something wrong with them, and they will get over it. They will see the light at the end of the tunnel, and literally, because if they come in spring, it's dark in January, and then by June it will be sunny the whole day, right? So literally. But it's very important to understand the stages, because whatever we learn, all the stereotypes that we come, all the luggage we carry behind us, not literally, it influences how we perceive things. And as the sooner we understand that it's not right or wrong, you just have to adapt and learn, the better it goes, the sooner it goes better. Does it resonate a little? Do you think it can be applied also within the country borders if you would go from one tribe to the other? So you don't have to travel abroad even. But given the fact that some of you will actually travel abroad, I hope this is a little bit useful.
Can I come with one example? As I mentioned, I have brought students to Ghana several times, Norwegian students. And once I would say, I experienced that one of the students got a serious culture shock coming here to Ghana. He was a very quiet, shy person. I was sitting next to him at the plane down to Accra, and he said it was his first time on plane, and he had never been abroad before. And I was thinking, oh my, how would this go? I was getting nervous. And you know, when we landed at the airport, there were people who wanted to carry our bags. We went to the beach, people who came to us and wanted to sell things. And all over, all the places we went to, he was approached to people that wanted to sell him things or ask him about things. And it was too much for him. It was too much. He wanted his peace and quiet, and please leave me alone. I don't want this. I just want to go home. So he didn't want to go with us on excursions. He stayed in his room, and finally he got malaria. And I think he got malaria because his immune system was weakened through the experience. So that is the only time I really have seen a big culture shock at a student. And I actually had to go with him back home to Norway. Yeah.
But again, things go towards the light, things get better. And once you're adjusted, and maybe you learn some of the few things, like for example to say, what was it, medase? Yeah, I'll say that at the end. You learn some of the language, you interact with locals, you might even call yourself bicultural at least, right? You start to understand the culture. And in the context of international exchange students, what happens? Because this process takes some months, right? It's individuals. Some people might not even experience all this stressful period or very happy period, but most of them do. And what happens when they finally adjust and finally feel at home? they experience the reverse part, because then they go back home. And do you know what happens? You come back home and you're so happy and you want to show all your friends pictures, and you start showing one picture and they look and it's, oh, nice nature in Norway. And then they see a video. And then by the 10th picture they are like, why are you keep showing me this? I've seen there are fjords and mountains. And for you, that's like, but I experienced it. It was really nice. I really want to show you. So then you come to this engagement part where you're so happy that you came home and you want to share all the happiness and you want to share everything that you've experienced and the joy that you've been abroad and so on. But people around you listen to you politely at the beginning, and then they are, life moves on. Come on, get on with it. And then you go into the re-entry shock. Right? You have to readjust. In Norway, for example, I don't know, let's say that students, if they want to go to parties and they want to buy a beer or something, they have to hurry up because alcohol is only sold in some type of stores until a certain hours, right? So you finally get over that cultural part, and then you come back home and you're so stressed and you're leaving from lecture early. Why? Because you have to go and get your juice or beer or something for the party. But then you realize, oh, but here they don't close the store at 5 o'clock. So then is this readjustment part where everything you learned that was valid back wherever you visited, whether it's another country, another university, another tribe, another part of the country, you have to, readapt to it. So this model, it goes up and down, and it's, as I said, individual. Some might experience all the stages, some might not. But it's very important to know that it's a natural way of understanding and experiencing new cultures. And then Øyvind just came with this example of the Norwegian student who needed the space. This is a Norwegian bus. What's the first thing that strikes you? Some might say that half of it is empty. I would argue that in Norwegian standards, this is a full bus. Would the full bus in Ghana look like this? No. People in general are polite, right? If you meet Norwegians on the streets, downtown Volda or in the capital, they would not necessarily look at you and say hi. You meet the same people on the mountain, suddenly everybody smiles and talks to you, and they are your best friends, and you share bread or a snack or a chocolate, and the tips, if you go on this path, you have a nice view and so on. And then you end up somewhere remotely, alone, and you might think, oh, these Norwegian people, they are so cold and lonely, and it will be a little bit like the student, like, I don't want to see people around me. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't want to integrate into the culture. But this bus in Norway, it's full because people don't want to enter into your private space. They respect your private space. So if they would see there's an empty seat next to, they would sit there. It doesn't mean they don't like you. It doesn't mean I don't like him if we go together and I sit behind or in front or another aisle. It just means, okay, he needs his space. Let us give him his space. The lonely cabins in the mountains, it doesn't necessarily mean that people just want to be all the time alone. But in Norway, there's a very strong sense of community, of helping each other. We have a word for it. It's dugnad. I'm sure it's the same in the local communities here. So building a cabin was something that was a common effort. And building a cabin was also a way of giving people shelter. And if you're on a mountain, I mean, the cabins obviously, as shelters, there are somewhere where it's inaccessible. So there obviously are not so many people. So it doesn't mean that if you're on a cabin on the top of a mountain alone, is that you don't like people. Oh, I don't like people. It means that, it's a symbol of community, of something built together, and of helping each other. And also, you go. Okay, are we allowed to be a little bit political today?
Sure.
A little bit. You go to the US, certain central states, and you see people with certain flags, lots of flags. Do you think it's a good thing necessarily? You go, okay, let me take a European example. You go to Germany and you see lots and lots and lots and lots of people gather with the flags. It's not necessarily a positive thing. People have lots of associations with bad things that happened in the past, right? In Norway, people are proud of the flag. It's not necessarily a symbol of nationalistic closed movements, but it's a symbol of the people, right? The national holiday, you see lots of people dressed up in national costumes. They don't parade for, I don't know, bad things. They parade to celebrate the people. Actually, in Norway, the national day, it's the children's parade, it's the people's parade. Many countries, for national days, have a military parade, right? Is that the case? Yeah? In Norway, you don't have military parades, you have people's parades. So even flags, remember we talked about flags on the top of the iceberg, it's something that you see, that's the surface culture. Under that, it's the fact that people are proud of being Norwegian. People, you know, it's one people. And I'll share with you some personal experience. You remember Eivind asked you, what are the stereotypes, what's a typical Norwegian? You look at me, am I a typical Norwegian woman? No? Yes? Okay, the ones who say no, why? How would I be? Taller? I'm trying to wear high heels, come on. It's, How would I be if I were a Norwegian person? Whiter, okay, yeah. I am not Norwegian. And I went to Volda as a student, and for the past 2 decades I have been involved at the university in various capacities connected to internationalization. But my first impression 2 decades ago, when I arrived to Volda, I arrived on a Sunday. It was unfortunately after some terror attacks on a metro in London, so there were lots of controls. I lost my plane, I lost the connection, and I arrived 1 week before, after 20 hours of traveling. I was tired, it was a Sunday, and I was picked up, taken to the dorms, given the key, and told everything is closed on Sunday. Okay, let me go around, it was a nice day. And I saw, you know, this is Volda, this is downtown Volda, right? This is also downtown Volda. I was living just where, you know, where I took the pictures behind the stones. So nice view, everything green, idyllic, still everything closed. This is also downtown Volda by the bus station. The same here. Is there a thing you notice? What's missing? People. So for me, it was like, where did I come? Where are the people? What happens here? It was, of course, I learned many years after, and I'm doing the same now, to be honest. In Norway, we have 1 month free, right? That's July. And that's when you want to get away from the rain and the coldness, and you leave your place and you go abroad and you holiday and so on. So because it was 1 week before the school start, everybody was on holiday. Because it was 1 week before the school start, there were no students on campus. So basically, what I thought it was, oh, this idyllic mountain resort, it became a ghost town for me. And then I said, okay, no worries, I'll manage this, I'll find the university, and I'll somehow get, you know, this feeling that I belong, because I was a student. And I walk, and I walk, and I walk, and I see this building, and I walk past it, and then I ask people around, you know, everybody was speaking English, so that was good. And I asked, where's the university? And they point me back to this building. And I was like, I literally just called my father and said, you know what? I don't know where university is, but I passed the wood processing factory. Because university, my idea of a university was this, right? Or this. Not my alma mater, but the universities look like this. Or this is actually the library at my university, the corner left up. My alma mater is this, right? It looks a little bit different, than the wood processing factory. Would you agree? So for me, this was a shock. I called and I said, I'm supposed to be a university student and I don't know what's this. I learned since then that, university and teaching quality is as the same in the wood processing factory as in the big imposing buildings. And I would like to share with you one more example of what the culture setting that we grow up with, that we bring with us, can do to somebody going abroad. And this is, again, a real story. You see this? What do you think they are? A part of being red rocks? Some markings of some sort, right? Yeah. Here as well, markings. Yeah. This might give you a hint. Do you guess? Anybody care to contribute? Okay, I'll tell you afterwards. We go here. This is in Norway. All the pictures you're seeing now are in Norway. The previous slide were not in Norway. Markings, red markings, path marked in red, more path marks in red with red stones. So now the story comes. A group of students from an African country, not Ghana, went on exchange to a Norwegian university. And as part of the introduction week, they were invited to a cabin. And they were told that from the campus they have to take this bus and that bus, and then they have to walk a path. So then they take the bus, all good until they reach the path. And they see a red sign. And they see another red sign. They got lost, and everybody worried. Where is this group of students? Where are they? And calling, they didn't have SIM cards. It was this huge, search action to finally find them. And it happened 2 or 3 times with the same group. And it turned out that every time they were seeing a red mark on a path in Norway, they were backing away and trying to find alternative paths. And they were seeing other marks, and they were backing away and going the other way. Do you know why? Because where they were coming from, red marks were marking landmines. So these poor students were terrified they are going to be blown to pieces by walking through the Norwegian forest. And it took a while until the workers at the university understood that that is the case, and that maybe it's smart to introduce that as a presentation when they come in. And the whole point of it is that, again, whatever we come with, we take with us when we travel, it's so deeply ingrained within us that we don't even think about it. It's just there, we feel it. Red, danger, I go somewhere else, right? It took a while for them to get past it, and I can tell you, I checked, nothing bad happened when they went back home. They relearn. So this readjustment curve I showed you before, it worked very fast. So when they went back home, they were still avoiding the red marks. And here I conclude these personal examples, and I give the word back, because culture shock is something real, and we have to get the tools, and we have to give students the tools to work with them.
Yes, I will now give you 5 things to remember about what constitutes intercultural communication. First thing, we have already talked a bit about it, the verbal dimension. I want you to remember these 5 dimensions as very crucial when you do intercultural communication. What is important to remember, and what is actually intercultural communication about? The first thing is the verbal dimension. It's language, right? Because language is not just language. Language is so many things. If I say mother, it's a lexical meaning. It means a woman who has given birth, right? But you also can have some connotations, some associations about when you hear the word mother. It can mean care, something warm, something nice, things like that. If I say cat, in Norwegian culture, a cat is a pet, So it's something cozy. You can have it in your house and you can give it milk and fish and whatever. But can have this meaning. But in China, for instance, cat is a delicacy. You eat it. For us, you cannot eat a cat. It's no. So it can have different meanings. Also, the language, the way you talk, we call it para-language. We'll come to that. But the way you talk. If I say, "Are you going home?" it can mean many things. I can say it like this: "Are you going home?" Or, "Are you going home?" I mean, it can have different meanings the way you put it. If you are strict in your voice and your tone, or have a nice voice. And you also, in Norwegian, we have subject, object, subject, verbal, and object. Like, the man opened the book. But in Japanese, it's subject, object, verbal. So the man, the book opened, right? So these things, they interfere. When you learn a new language, you can do mistakes because you take your own language into the other language, and you do these kinds of mistakes. So these are very important things to be aware of. These parts of the verbal dimension. And when we come to the next dimension, the verbal dimension, it constitutes how I look at people, the eye contact, my gestures, how you greet people, the distance between. You talked about it. You know, close distance is very intimate. Longer distance is more distant. But these are not the same from culture to culture. So Latin America, they talk very close. So if a Latin America comes to me and goes up to my face, I would back up. And he comes closer, and I would back up again, like this. And we can suddenly be at the other end of the room. Because he's too intimate to me, but when I back up, I'm too far away from him. So these things are also not the same. I met a Ghanaian in Norway once. I hadn't met him before. But when I learned he was a Ghanaian, I greeted him the Ghanaian way, with this handshake and this on my way out. And he was smiling and saying, "Oh, you're a real Ghanaian." So it's just the small things. It's quite important if you can learn some of these things when you come to a new culture. So the nonverbal dimension is also very important. The next dimension is the worldview dimension. It's not necessarily, it's also about religion, but it's the way you understand the world, what kind of attitudes, what kind of values you have. And the social dimension is all about family, kinship, and things, and the individual dimension. We'll talk about these things very soon. Because if you have all the four dimensions, you still have your own personality, which is different from everybody else, actually. So, as I said, the verbal dimension has it can be lexical, it can be connotative. The way you talk about things, the tone you have, and so on. And the gestures is the nonverbal dimension that I mentioned. Distance, sign, how you use your hands. In some cultures, you don't use your point finger when you should show something, but you use your nose. You show somebody this way or this way, just with the nose. So it's not a given how we use the verbal, non-verbal language. So we call body movements kinesics. It's an academic term. how we use body language and facial expressions, how we smile. In Japanese culture, for instance, smiling can be also if you're embarrassed, you can smile. It's not necessarily that you're very happy, but it can be if you are embarrassed. Touch and smell. In the Middle East, I've heard that if you smell sweating, if you have sweated a lot, it's masculine. It's very nice. You're a real man if you smell a lot of sweat. But in our culture, we use deodorants and we try everything, perfume and everything, to avoid smelling sweaty. So these things are also very different from culture to culture. And this is about distance. So nonverbal language is very central.
I was just wondering, would we have a 1-minute exercise here now? Just see how far we go with nonverbal communication. Should we?
Okay.
Yeah? So what I would like you to do now, if you can turn to your neighbor, 2 and 2, and without saying anything, without saying anything, try to communicate something. And then we will just go a little bit around to see what you wanted to communicate and how was that perceived. Is that okay? Okay, so you have 30 seconds to communicate without talking.
No talking, just body language. So what did you communicate? Anyone?
Okay, we start here with the profs and the doctors so that they give you courage. I saw you communicating.
Okay, so we're discussing that some students are sleeping because they are tired. So when you say, okay, let's do 1-minute exercise, so it means that you want them to be active. So I was just using my eyes to get informed.
Did you get all that?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Okay, so you...
I told him I'm hungry.
How did you do that? Okay, yeah. Did you understand he was hungry? Okay. Let's see somewhere here. Yeah?
So I told him, please, I am hungry, I need something to eat. So please.
Please. Okay. Did you understand he was hungry? Did you give him something to eat? No. Okay. So this was just to illustrate very, very briefly that I'm sure many of you use these things, or eye movements, or just eye blinks, without realizing that you're actually communicating, and you do it every day. Is that true? Yeah.
Okay, the fourth dimension, worldview dimension. I can mention one example that is important in some culture, like Turkish culture, Greek culture, Bulgaria, Ethiopia. It's called the evil eye. I'm sure you have heard about it, the evil eye. You can have amulets, you can have some kind of jewelry that has this evil eye to protect you. And you can some people name their children with ugly names, because that is also a protection against the evil eye. So worldview is about how your religion, how you think about the values you have, attitudes you have, and so on. So then we can go on if this works. So it's actually the framework, but the fourth dimension is then the social dimension. And it's very important because I have a brother, just one brother, and I also have just one brother-in-law. So the way I talk to my brother is not the same as I talk to my brother-in-law. And also I also have one sister and one sister-in-law. So I also talk, of course, differently to them than in between them than I would with just one of them. So it matters who we speak to. If it's a boss, if it's somebody that is under us in a position, if it's our father, our mother, you know, these things also is very important how we communicate. We need to know the other one. A friend of mine, he is a social anthropologist, and he went to Sudan as a social anthropologist, and he lived in a community, and they couldn't figure out who this person was, because he couldn't explain to them what he was doing as a social anthropologist. They had no clue. What is a social anthropologist? What is he doing here? Why is he here? Why is he asking these stupid questions? But after a while, he got a visit from his family, his wife and his children. And all of a sudden, they saw that he was a father, he was a husband, and they could relate. He was a human being, actually. Yeah. So otherwise, they couldn't place him. They didn't have a social status to place him. So these things are so important for us. Status and how you perform your status and what norms you have. If you have some norms, if you do something wrong in a society, if you steal, you can go in prison, right? But because there is a law against it, the authority has laws. But you can also be excluded among your friends, you know. So not necessarily written laws. It can be also unwritten laws. And there are sanctions about this. So family, kinship, everything, all this is very important, how you communicate.
And then we go to, that was the fifth dimension, right?
Yeah, fifth dimension, individual dimension.
Because we have all these dimensions and because we have all our own cultural background, we perceive things differently, right? So now I would like you to look at the screen, and you have, let's say, 20 seconds to figure out how many times the letter F appears in the sentence below. Ready to answer? Okay, so anybody here, how many letters? Yes, please. You got 5, yes? 7. 7. 7, okay, any other numbers? 6, okay. So we got 5, we got 6, we got 7. The real answer, the correct answer, is not actually important. My point here is that our backgrounds, the way we're learned, for example, to read, like in Øyvind's first example, right? We read left to right instead of right to left. Everything that forms us can also make us oversee things, because we don't need to read every single letter to understand the text. We can just fill up the gaps with what is probably, you know, it's internalized. We learn how to read when we're little. We don't need to read letter by letter. We just read and fill out the gaps, right? And that's something that we also do and we also apply in social contexts. We don't necessarily go piece by piece to understand what you did and why you did something. We just fill in the gaps with our imagination. Do you want to know the correct answer? The correct answer was 7 letters. Do you want to do more exercises like this, similar? Yes. Okay, well, whenever we fix the problems. How many triangles did you see here? I'll give you, instead of 30 seconds, 1 minute. I guess it's engaging to count triangles at one point. But because we have to move on, can I just ask, who reached what numbers? 17? 18? 21? Okay, any other numbers? It feels like a bidding here. One of the answers is that there are 27 triangles. We all look at the same pictures, right? But yet we see things differently, right? Some of us are analytical. Some of us start counting in a certain pattern. Some of us just count and then start counting again, and then that's me. I miss the count, I start again, and by the end I finish, you know. The point here, if you apply all the dimensions that Øyvind has talked about, you realize that even when you're in the same situation, you see the same context around you, but you might interpret it different. Is that correct? Does it relate to you? Have you been in the same room, listened to the same thing, and went out with your friend and understood completely different things? Yes, or friend or enemy or whatever. With enemies, a little bit easier. You understand different things anyway, no? Yeah. Okay. Very shortly, another exercise, because I saw you liked counting triangles. How many triangles do you see here? Okay, so how many triangles do you see, people? 0, 6, 8, 3, 4. Okay, so we went to 0 to 8 and basically all the numbers in between. This is a psychological exercise devised in the 50s. It doesn't mean anything in this context. But we're all looking at something and we construct it in our head, right? The same applies for social contexts, for social situations, for cultural contexts, for how we understand meeting with somebody from a different culture. We can convince ourselves that we heard something, we saw something, the blink of an eye, the gesture of a hand, that means, for us, it means something, when actually it's just, oh, I have a fly around. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. The answer here is that mathematically there are no triangles. But the point for this lecture is that we fill up with all our background, we fill up context, we fill up conversations, we fill up parts of how we understand cultures based on these social dimensions that we talked about before. Okay. In other settings, I would ask you to draw on paper, but it's not the right setting for it. But the idea would be that using 3 continuous lines without lifting the pen from the paper, you're supposed to connect all the dots. And if you had pen and paper right now, I could show you at least 2 ways of doing it. One of the solutions is to go outside the lines. I didn't say how long the lines have to be. They have to be straight, but they can go obliquely. You see, the line here, it's barely touching the dot, but it is touching the dot technically, right? So this is one of the solutions. The other solution, you take the paper, you roll it, and then when you do it's a continuous line, and it's straight, and it goes around. The point here is that we're used to think very often within the framework that our culture, our education, our family values, norms have taught us. We think inside the box. There's nothing wrong about it, but that's how societies are built, right? And then you have every now and then this odd person that thinks outside the box, and the ones around them are like, ugh, they are not well, right? When in fact, they might not be wrong. It's just that sometimes thinking outside the box might be the way of doing. So taking a step out of what you learned about the culture, seeing your own culture from outside, might be answering lots of questions you've had throughout your life. I won't give you any personal examples right now. So yes, please remember that the dimensions are there, They define how we are, how we act, how we react, how we interact with others, but there's always room for thinking outside the box. And we're always going to be reading and interpreting social settings differently. Because a part of learning everything in a community or having this general sense of understanding of a culture, we also have a personal sense of understanding a culture, right? And I'm going to give the word to you because you had some things to say about it, right?
Yes, I would. We are soon finishing up, and I would like, before we finish, to say about what kind of attitudes can we have or should we have to other cultures. We usually think about two basic attitudes. The one is ethnocentrism. You know, the meaning that thinking that your own culture is the best, whatever. Ghanaian culture is the best. There's nothing like Ghanaian culture. Or Norwegian culture is the best. It's nothing like Norwegian culture. Which of course is in many ways a very good way of thinking because we are proud of who we are and where we come from and all that. But, you know, we also should broaden our mind a little bit and see that there are other ways of doing it. Like you said, thinking out of the box can mean that others do it some other ways than we do it, and maybe it's as good as we do it. So there are two basic attitudes. The one is ethnocentrism, the other one is cultural relativism, which is kind of the other ditch, if I might say. Ethnocentrism could be a ditch if you have this narrow view of your own culture as the best, and the other ditch is cultural relativism. If you say that, well, everything is fine, there are no rules, you can accept whatever, they do it there, and if it's fine for them, it's fine. And because there might be some universal values that are good for everyone. So we should try to find these universal values that are common, like finding common ground between Norway and Ghana, for instance. What kind of universal values? What do we share, and how can we meet and find some common grounds? I mean, you can look at how they do it there. Maybe you think that, okay, this might be a good idea, and the other way around. You know, you learn by meeting the other person, the other culture, and you say you can learn and you can develop your own culture when you see something else. So I will not go into details with these values, but I think this is a good way of thinking, that we try to learn from the other. But I will also point at a third way of approaching another culture or viewing cultures. You have ethnocentrism, which might be one ditch, and you have cultural relativism, that might be another ditch. But if you take the third viewpoint, like we can call it multi-perspective. And by multi-perspective, I mean, like if you go by a helicopter or a drone, nowadays, you have a drone, you go out of your own culture, and you have a helicopter view of it. That means that you can be a little bit critical of Ghanaian culture and Norwegian culture, and have this attitude that you can learn something. I myself, I come from a small island in Western Norway, and I'm very proud. I try to keep my dialect. It's a special dialect. But I don't want people to see that I'm narrow-minded just from this island. I've traveled a lot, so I also like to look at myself as a global person. I want to have a global perspective. So I have both at the same time. I have a local perspective, I'm proud of it, I'm proud of where I come from, but I also have a global perspective, which is this helicopter view of culture, or a multi-perspective. I think that what we should aim at. to be critical of our own, but also proud of our own culture. So multicultural, if you forget everything that we have talked about, maybe you can remember these three, and particularly the multi-perspective. Please try to have a multi-perspective of cultures and yourself. And I think on that note, we could say that this is something we should strive at. And if you have this multi-perspective and cultures meet, which they do today, we have this blending of culture. It's very difficult to say that this is Norwegian culture, this is Ghanaian culture, because we meet and we mix. And we are both, maybe both at the same time. You get hybrid culture, or you get Creole culture, which means that you create something new of something else. So this is what we would like to end up with. I could give you examples. This is an example of a hybrid culture in Congo. They call themselves Les Sapeurs. We don't have time to show the video, but you can find it on YouTube. And they have been in Paris. They have learned Parisian fashion. And they come back to Congo, Brazzaville, and they dress up in a special style. It's not Parisian, and it's not Congolese, but it's Les Sapeurs. They have their own style. So it's a kind of hybrid culture. So it's actually not, maybe intercultural communication is a bit wrong way of putting it. It's more like about human encounters, because it's not cultures that meets, it's human beings. And we talked about the individual dimension. We are individual persons, we have our personality, so it's the personalities that meets, and we are all different. So I want you also to remember that one. And finally, there are two ways we could say that we could, two attitudes we could have to culture. It's the essentialistic, which talks about Norwegian cultures, the Vikings and Ghanaian cultures, like many tribes or whatever, but the best way of looking at culture is the dynamic dimension. What I said, it's about human beings meeting other human beings. So we have globalization and we have localization, but what that means finally is that we are global and we have globalization. So that's on those notes, we would like to thank you all for everything and for listening.